glad to see you again this week. It's week 2 of summer reading program. Have you been keeping track of how many minutes you've been reading or how many minutes mom or dad has been reading to you? It's really important if you want to win prizes this summer, and you can do it. I know you can. I'm working on it myself. Make sure you go to the library's website so you can get the special program where you keep track of all of the minutes you've been reading and you can be in the running for the prizes, okay? Well, we've got some good stories and some good songs today, and I'm so glad that you're here with me to enjoy them. Should we get started? Clap your hands if you love stories. Clap your hands, I know you do. I'm so glad that we could be together. Glad to share a story time with you. Once upon a time, in a town far away, there lived a miller. And the miller had a daughter who was good and loving and beautiful. But the two of them were not very well off. They were kind of poor, and sometimes, even though they were happy together, the miller wished that he was more than he was. Well, it came to pass that one day the king was passing through the town, and the miller happened to find himself in the same place that the king was. And the miller wanted to appear bigger than he was, so he began to brag, and he began to tell things that weren't quite true. And when he was talking about how beautiful his daughter was, he couldn't help himself, and he heard himself say, "And she's so talented that she can spin straw into gold." And the king said, "Well, that's impossible." And the miller said, "No, it's true. My daughter is the most talented spinner in the world." The king said, "If this is true, I would like to see proof. Bring your daughter to the castle tomorrow and we shall see." The miller couldn't back down now. He would get in trouble. He feared that he would be arrested if he was caught lying to the king. So he took his daughter to the castle and sadly left her there. Well, the miller's daughter was terrified when the king took her to a room that was full of straw and said, "Now, you will stay here overnight, and in the morning I expect all of this straw to be spun into gold." And he closed and locked the door behind him. The poor miller's daughter sat down and began to cry. She had no idea how to spin straw into gold. No one can do that. But as she sat there crying, she heard a strange voice say, "Young lady, why are you crying so hard?" And she looked up and saw the strangest thing. A small little man with a large nose and weird little beady eyes was watching her. It was no stranger than anything else that was going on, though, so she sniffed and said, "I'm expected to spin all of this straw into gold, and I can't do that." And the little man said, "What will you give me if I do it for you?" The miller's daughter shrugged and said, "My necklace that my mother left me." And the man nodded and said, "All right." And he began to spin. And he spun, and eventually the miller's daughter nodded off to sleep. And she woke in the morning to the sound of the door being unlocked and the king coming in. And all around them, all of the straw had been spun into gold. And the little man was nowhere to be seen. Well, the king was amazed and thrilled, but he found himself growing a little more greedy. And so he said, "All right, you've done well. Let's see what else you can do." And he took the miller's daughter into a much bigger room, filled with even more straw. And he said, "See if you can spin this into gold by tomorrow morning." And he closed and locked the door behind him as he left. And she began to cry again. But just as the night before, she heard a small voice saying, "Young lady, why are you crying?" And it was the same little man. And she explained, "Again, I'm expected to spin all this straw into gold, and I can't possibly do that." The little man said, "What will you give me this time if I do this for you?" And the miller's daughter said, "My ring from my finger." And the little man nodded and said, "I will accept." And he began to spin. And just as the night before, the miller's daughter fell asleep, and when she woke, all of the straw was gold, and the king was thrilled. But that wasn't the end for her. The king took her into the largest room in the castle, which was piled to the ceiling with straw. And he said, "This time, my dear, if you can spin all of this into gold, I will marry you and make you my queen." As he left, she found herself growing weepy again, because surely, even if she had help spinning this into gold, there was too much straw to spin in one night. The little man showed up and said, "Now what will you give me for spinning this?" And she said, "I have nothing left to give. The only two things of value were my necklace and my ring, and you have them." And the little man said, "I will make you a deal. I will spin this straw into gold for you, and in exchange, you will give me the first child that you bear for the king." Well, the miller's daughter knew that if the job was not done, she would not be bearing any children at all for the king, and she would be lucky to be able to keep her head. So she agreed, having no other choice. And the little man did as he promised. The next morning, all of that straw had been turned into gold, and the king was so happy that he took the miller's daughter to be his wife. A year later, they were thrilled as they brought a new baby forth into the world, a little prince. The kingdom rejoiced. And as the new queen was lying down to sleep one night, she heard a voice coming from the corner of her chambers, saying, "I have come for what you promised me." And she looked and she saw the little man who had spun the straw into gold, and she begged and pleaded, because as valuable as her ring and her necklace had been, there was nothing more valuable to her than her son, her baby. But the little man would not relent. He would not hear any of her pleas, any of her cries. And finally, he said, "Enough. I will give you 3 days. 3 days in which, if you can tell me what my name is, I will let you keep your child." Of course, the queen agreed. The next day, she sent servants out to every corner of the kingdom to collect every name, ordinary to rare, that they could find. And that night, when the little man came to her and said, "Now, can you tell me my name?" she started naming every name she could think of. She named Robert and Michael and Stephen. She said Casper and Melchior and Balthazar. But to each one, the little man smiled and shook his head and said, "That is not my name." And eventually, she had named all the names that she could, and he went away. The next day, she sent the servants out even further to other kingdoms, collecting the strangest, weirdest names that they could find. And when the little man came back that night, she was asking him, "Is your name Gobbles? Could it perhaps be Ribbing Top, or maybe Pickle Nose?" But every time, and no matter how strange the name was, the little man shook his head and said, "That is not my name." Well, on the 3rd day, the queen sent the servants out to search as far as they could, anywhere they could find, for any name that they hadn't had before. And when they came back, one servant said, "Your Majesty, I did not find any new names, but I heard the strangest thing. As I was passing through the woods, I heard a voice coming from inside one of the trees. And it was singing, and it said, 'Today I bake, tomorrow brew, the next day, princeling, come for you. What a very good thing that none shall claim, that Rumpelstiltskin is my name.'" The queen thought and thought and thought. And that night, the little man came back and said, "This is your last chance. Can you tell me what my name is, or shall I take your baby now?" And the queen thought to herself, and she said, "Is your name Jim?" And he laughed. "That is not my name." And she said, "Perhaps your name is Fred?" And the little man laughed harder and said, "No, Your Majesty, that is not my name." And the queen said, "Then perhaps your name would be Rumpelstiltskin." At that, the little man's face grew red, and his mouth grew wide, and he was as angry as anyone had ever been, and he began to stamp his feet, and he said, "A witch told you that! A witch told you that! You could not have learned that any other way!" And he stamped harder and harder until his feet cracked the floor beneath him, and he broke the floor and fell down right into the earth. And no one ever saw Rumpelstiltskin again. And the king and the queen and their baby lived happily ever after. For our finger play today, I want you to get up off your chair if you can. You can do it sitting down if you need to, but I think it'll be more fun if we get up, because it's going to be a finger play about popcorn. And popcorn pops in the pan and it jumps. And since we're going to be jumping, I have a friend who's really good at jumping to help us out, okay? Well, whenever we say pop, 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 what do you think I want you to do? That's right. Can you show? Pop, pop, pop. Just like that. Show me. Wow, you guys are great jumpers. All right, so here we go. You ready? Pop, 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 says the popcorn in the pan. Pop, 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 you may catch me if you can. Pop, 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 says each kernel hard and yellow. Pop, 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 I'm a jolly little fellow. Pop, 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 how I scamper through the heat. Show me how you scamper. Pop, 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 you will find me good to eat. Pop, 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 I can whirl, spin around and skip and hop. Pop, 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 dancing, I never want to stop. You want to keep jumping? Do it one more time. Here we go. Pop, 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 says the popcorn in the pan. Pop, 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 you can catch me if you can. Pop, 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 says each kernel hard and yellow. Pop, 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 I'm a jolly little fellow. Pop, 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 how I scamper through the heat. Pop, 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 you will find me good to eat. Pop, 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 I can whirl and skip and hop. Pop, 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 dancing, I never want to stop. Good job. The rabbit says good job too. This is another story about a miller. This is not the same miller as the first story. This miller doesn't have a daughter. He has a son. But they were just as poor as the miller and the daughter in the other story. And one day, the miller and his son set off to town with their donkey, who they were hoping to be able to sell. And they walked along the path toward town, the miller, his son, and the donkey. As they began to pass people, they noticed that some of the people were giggling and laughing at them from behind their hands. And eventually, the miller listened to what one of them was saying. He said, "Look at that man and his son. They're just walking alongside the donkey. They look so tired, and neither one of them has the idea of actually riding the donkey. How stupid can they be?" And the miller said, "They're right." And he said to his son, "Get up on the donkey and ride, so that we don't look foolish." And so they continued on to town like that. The miller and his son on the donkey. And they made their way along further and further. As they got closer to town, they saw more people. These people weren't laughing. These people were glaring, angry, disgusted. And the miller began to listen again, and he heard one of them say to another, "How awful is that? Look at that. That young, healthy man riding the donkey while his old father has to walk. He should be ashamed of himself." And the miller was embarrassed, and he said, "Son, get down from there. I shall ride." And so they changed places. And now the young man was walking beside the donkey with his father, riding on the back. Now they came to town, and there were even more people there. And these people looked just as angry and disgusted as the other ones. And the miller began to listen to what they were saying. And they were saying, "Look at that. That man is riding and making his poor little boy walk alongside him. Doesn't he care about his child? What kind of awful father was that?" And the miller was even more embarrassed. And he said, "Son, get up behind me. We shall both ride." And so the two of them now riding on the donkey further into town toward the marketplace. They don't really fit. And that was kind of the point. Because after a while, the miller heard even more people, and these people weren't even trying to whisper to each other. These people were angry and saying it loudly. How dare those two? Look at that poor donkey having to carry 2 men on its back. That's a shame. That's just animal abuse. Why, they should give that donkey a turn. They should be the ones carrying it for a change. And the miller said, I hadn't thought of that. But if that's what we should do, then that's what we should do. And so he and his son got down and he said, let's carry the donkey. And they tried, they struggled to get the donkey up on their shoulders to carry it. But donkeys don't like being carried, as you just saw. And so the donkey struggled and kicked and fell off and ran away until neither of them could find him. And they looked and looked, but the donkey was gone for good. Probably to a family that wasn't quite so concerned with what other people thought of them. Because that's the moral of the story. If you try to please everybody, you end up pleasing nobody. Okay, for our song today, I need you to go find something scarf-like. It could be a real scarf. If you don't have a scarf, though, that's okay. You can go get a dish towel or a washcloth or an old winter scarf or, I don't know, a sock. Anything that you can wave around like that, okay? Anything at all. Are you ready? Let's sing then. Put your scarf on your head, on your head. Put your scarf on your head, on your head. Put your scarf on your head, whether it's purple, blue, or red. Put your scarf on your head, on your head. Put your scarf on your shoulder, on your shoulder. Put your scarf on your shoulder, on your shoulder. Put your scarf on your shoulder, well, at least it's not a boulder. Put your scarf on your shoulder, on your shoulder. Put your scarf on your arm, on your arm. Put your scarf on your arm, on your arm. Put your scarf on your arm, 'cause what's the harm? Put your scarf on your arm, on your arm. Put your scarf on your lap, on your lap. Put your scarf on your lap, on your lap. Put your scarf on your lap, it's such a snap. Put your scarf on your lap, on your lap. Put your scarf on your knee, on your knee. Put your scarf on your knee, on your knee. Put your scarf on your knee, that's where it ought to be. Put your scarf on your knee, on your knee. Put your scarf on your toes, on your toes. Put your scarf on your toes, on your toes. Put your scarf on your toes, that's where it goes. Put your scarf on your toes, on your toes. Put your scarf on your head, on your head. Put your scarf on your head, on your head. Put your scarf on your head, whether it's purple, blue, or red. Put your scarf on your head, on your head. Good job. Throw it up in the air and catch it. You guys are great. Oh, that was a good time today. What you got there, Mr. Bunny? What'd you find? You found the donkey. You found the donkey that ran away. See, I knew that he'd be in good hands. And you'll take good care of him, won't you? Guys, I'm really glad that you came this week, and I hope that you enjoyed our stories and songs. And I really hope that you'll come back again next week, and as well, come and see all the other online programs we've got going on this summer. And remember, do your summer reading and keep track. You'll do that, right? All right, let's get a good stretch in. Let me see you guys. Reach for the ceiling. Higher, bunny, higher. And touch the floor. Stand up again. Let's do some more. Touch your head. And now your knees. Up to your shoulders. Like this, you see. Reach for the ceiling. And touch the floor. That's all there is. There isn't any more. Say bye-bye. Bye.